Hey juniors, today we're going to start talking about life in the English colonies. In particular, we're going to focus on trading and how the colonies made money. So, our essential question for the day is, what is triangular trade and how does it apply to the 13 English colonies? So go ahead and take a moment, pause the video, and write this essential question down at the top of your notes page for today. So, the biggest thing that I want you to know about life in the English colonies is that the English colonies actually all had their own different types of governments. Granted, these governments were given power by a charter, and the English king did have the ultimate authority over all the colonies, but for the most part, the colonies did operate independently. They had town meetings, they made rules for living in the colony that did not necessarily come from the English king himself. In a lot of cases, the colonies had a government that reflected some type of democracy, where someone was voted into office or an authority position. The best example of this is in 1619, the First Virginia Assembly was held, which later split into two different groups: the Governor's Advisory Council and then representatives from the London Company. Both of these joined to form the House of Burgesses, and Burgesses is spelled B-U-R-G-E-S-S-E-S. So go ahead and make sure that this last bullet point is copied down in your notes. Pause the video if you need to. The other thing that the colonies had, they actually had their own court systems in a lot of cases. So if someone broke a rule, they would be held on trial. And these courts simply reflected the views and laws of the community. So it's very similar to how it is today. If you break a law, you get a trial and a lawyer. And all of your consequences come from how severe the law was. And it was the same back then. In particular, Plymouth Colony in Massachusetts had really strict religious laws. So a lot of times people would be going to court for that. Either way, the court system and the self-government system in general should remind us of democracy. And I think just in this instance, we can start to see the roots of America taking shape. The colonists were already thinking about how to live their own life independent of Great Britain. Alright, of course, England had reasons for wanting to establish its claim in North America through colonies. They wanted to make money. The colonies were essentially there to make England a lot of money, and they had a very special relationship with its colonies. Now, remember, the English colonies had resources and crops like timber, tobacco, sugarcane, and indigo. The colonies would grow those things and then send them to England. Timber in specific definitely needs to be noted here because it was super important and was a major industry. And timber is essentially wood prepared for building and carpentry. And here's an example of it right here. Now, the English government also did something for the colonies, and what they did was provide the colonies with manufactured goods like guns, powder, clothing, and cigarettes to the colonies in exchange for timber, tobacco, and sugarcane. Now, think about it. Cigarettes have tobacco in them. So basically what would happen is that the colonies would sell tobacco to England, and England would buy the tobacco, turn around, make it into cigarettes, and ship those back to the colonies. So go ahead and take a minute and make sure that you have some of this written in your notes page. In particular, you need to have the definition for timber, And this last bullet point about the English government providing manufactured goods in exchange for natural resources. Pause the video if you need to. Now, remember that England founded its colonies to make money. So as a result, England is constantly thinking, how can I make the most money off the colonies as possible? So what they did was they started to practice mercantilism. And mercantilism is essentially a system of creating and maintaining wealth through controlled trade. So a good way to think about it is, think about how a person gets rich, and then the question is, how can I stay rich? The best way to get rich and then to stay rich is to control the laws of buying and selling. And that is exactly what we're going to see England do. So, before we move on, you do need to have the definition of mercantilism copied down in your notes. Alright, so the way that England started to control the laws in order to make more money is that they passed a series of acts known as the Navigation Acts. Alright, and this is essentially a bunch of laws that stated who the colonies could and could not sell to. So, the first Navigation Act did not allow the colonists to trade specific items such as sugar and cotton with any other country other than England. So England is the only colony getting those resources from the colonies. So as a result, England is the only one getting rich. As a result of this first Navigation Act, the colonies also had to buy its manufactured goods from Britain. And that was the only country that they could buy manufactured goods from. So what happened was Britain started hiking up its prices for things. And so what happens as a consumer, you don't have choices. So think about it. Think how you would feel if you were at a store and there were two types of t-shirts that you could buy that were exactly the same, but you were forced to buy the more expensive one. This is exactly what the English did to the colonists. They forced them into only being able to buy one type of manufactured good that came from Britain, and they made it expensive. This angered the colonists because then they don't have choices in what they're buying, and also they didn't really get a say in what they bought or sold. And when you don't have choices, people start to get upset. So you definitely need to have this bullet point about the Navigation Acts copied down in your notes. So what's important here is that it forbade colonists from trading specific items like sugar and cotton with any other country than England. Alright, triangular trade. So trade between the American colonies and Great Britain was not necessarily direct. So what happened was, you can see in the photo here that these arrows go in a triangle. They go in a triangle. And triangular trade is a system in which goods and slaves were traded among the Americas, Britain, and Africa. Now remember, slaves during this time are considered property, so they're treated the same way that goods are. So what would basically happen is that slaves would come to North America, grow the crops that would then be sent to Britain. Britain would send back manufactured goods and send manufactured goods to the slave traders in Africa, who would then send more slaves to North America. Now, recall that the slaves were brought to America from Africa on a route known as the Middle Passage. Alright, So where does this leave the colonists? For the most part, they were okay with their trade relationship from Britain. I mean, definitely some of them were not okay with it, but for the most part, they were. They were getting quality products and paying a decent price. In return, the colonists grew crops and the products to be manufactured in Europe. However, some colonists did disagree with this trade relationship, and again, we see the triangular trade going on. Some colonists did disagree with the trade relationship, and these were the first roots of a divide between Britain and the colonies. And issues like these would eventually lead to the American Revolution, where the colonists did not have a say in what was going on in their day-to-day life. So that's going to be it for our intro to new material today. It's time to get into our practicing. Thanks for listening, guys.